You who came, you will have in front of you a distinguished panel that I look forward to introduce as we go along. And you have in the schedule a very important topic. We hope more people will join when they end their lunch, but as you say, it's not the number, it's the quality of the audience that matters, and I can see a very qualified audience, and I encourage you all to also participate and ask your questions as we go along. During the opening session we had yesterday, I said in my speech that we have the sustainable goals in front of us. It's a historic vision. We can eradicate extreme poverty. We can bring clean water, sanitation, and food, and dignity, and security to all citizens of the world if we achieve it. And we are, if you look at the numbers and the statistics and the projections, we can do it. And it would be a historic achievement, the first generation in the world to do so. However, if we are to achieve it, we need a significant amount of investments. The estimate is we need $75 trillion by 2030. Now, the GDP, combined GDP of the US and the EU is around 35 trillion US dollars. So we need more than double that, the combined GDP of the EU and the US in investments. It's an enormous investment that we need, and that is why public-private partnerships are so important. There are many places where it has been difficult to create public-private partnerships, but there are also a lot of success stories out there. But the main thing to do is to share experiences, to learn from each other, and to then be able to scale up public-private partnerships for sustainable development. And that's what we are here to discuss. And that's what our panel will address. And we do have a very rich, broad range of experiences up here, and we have some very key experts from the world who can guide us on public-private partnership. What we will do is we will start out by the country experiences. And here we have a diverse set of countries, the Philippines and India, Belarus and Aruba, to tell about their experiences in public-private partnerships. We will then be followed by some development partners who can guide us on their experiences. And finally, we will turn also to the UNECE hosting this panel and our expertise, and also the process by which we can gather the experiences and turn them into standards that can be used by even more countries. So this is the layout of what we will do. And as said, you have a distinguished panel, and we will dive right into it. Our first panelist is His Excellency, the Minister of Infrastructure in Aruba, overseeing an infrastructure team, managing over 80 projects, responsible also for integration and environment. So, Your Excellency, Mr. Oslin Benito Sevinja, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Thank you to Mr. Bach for the invitation for Aruba to present our case to you. Let me tell a little bit of where Aruba is and what Aruba is doing. Aruba is a very small island, and we are part of the Dutch Kingdom in the Caribbean. We are right now in the middle of changing our mindset in the development, sustainable development for our island. Aruba in the 1987, our main income was the oil industry, our refinery, but it closed in 1987. And at that time, the government has decided we're going to change our focus from oil to tourism. And in 1987, we developed the tourism industry, who has been very successful. Right now in Aruba, we have more than 1.6 million people visiting us yearly. But what we have seen in the last 5-6 years is that we developed a very successful tourism sector. We have all the main hotels in Aruba, Radisson, Hyatt, you name all of them, the 5-star hotels in Aruba, but we have seen that the rest of the island has stayed behind. So we have 5-star hotels, but we don't have 5-star roads, 5-star schools, elderly homes, etc. So the new government, who's take office in 2009, has decided we're going to expand, or we're going to invest in the product Aruba so we can close that gap between the 5-star hotels and the rest of the island. So by doing that, we went to the drawing board and make a master plan, what we are going to do in the neighborhoods, how we're going to renovate our cities, Oranjestad, San Nicolas, what we're going to do with the elderly homes. But in doing that, we have realized that as a small country, we don't have the amount of money for all those projects, because you have bigger projects that you have to finance through your budget yearly. So if you have a project, for instance, like a road, we are busy right now with it, the Green Corridor is more than 100 million, and you have to put it on a small budget like Aruba, you don't have that capacity. So in looking into solution, we came to the conclusion that we can use the PPP concept for financing this project. But as a small island, you need expertise. You hear about the PPP. So where are you going to look for help to realize this project? So we went to the Netherlands. We are in the kingdom. In the Netherlands, they have brought experience with PPP projects in the European Union. So they send us some experts. We have here Marcella with us that help Aruba in the concept of PPP. And then we have more experts from all over the world came to Aruba and says, okay, if you're going to do these projects, you need to have a project that will attract international bidders. For a small island, a project like 60 million is a big project. For international bidders is nothing. So they won't come for a project with $60 million project. So what the expert told us as a small island is, what other project you are going to do that you can combine this road with the other projects. So we did a road, but when doing the road, we do improvement of the neighborhoods. We do improvement of the cities. So we combine those projects in a bigger project that at least it is $100,000 so you can attract international bidders. So by doing that, we went to the market. We have a market day. We invite through the media all consortiums all over the world, and they came to Aruba. So we have a lot of interest from Colombia, from Brazil, from Japan, from the United States to be interested in the project that Aruba is doing at that time. So we went to the bidding process. And through the bidding process, we have realized that we need to change our laws. As a small island, our law don't allow us to sign a contract, for instance, for 30 years. So we have to change the law and the policy. And by doing the changing in the law, we guarantee at the same time a transparency for the bidders. So the bidding system for Aruba is, first, everybody can submit a bid, and then a group of professionals will evaluate the bidders and select 3 of them. In the law, we put that when they select the 3 best bidders, the other ones can go to court to guarantee the transparency of the procurement. So we have a lot of 2 of the bidders who followed, went to court, and that's take us back, the setback in the process of the bidding. But my time is running out. Maybe in the question we can elaborate a little bit more on that. But Aruba is doing right now 2 big projects of PPP, what we call full-fledged PPP. We have small PPP, but full-fledged PPP is the design, build, finance, and maintain for a period of 20 to 30 years. And we have a lot of experience in these projects, so we think we can contribute to the small economy islands of the Caribbean or cities in Latin America to share our experience with them, how we did that, what we need to do to accomplish a quality PPP project. So we're glad to be here, and then maybe in the question we can elaborate a little bit more on the PPPs for a small island. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister, for that very engaged and also informative introduction, combining projects to a size that are large enough, a transparent bidding process, the policy framework right, the legal framework right, and now an ambition of Aruba to become the small island PPP center. I think it is indeed an encouraging example and inspiration, and I'm sure we will use it throughout the panel and the discussion as a good example. We now turn to a very different country on a very different continent, although Aruba is part of Europe, I know, as you rightly say it, Minister, but we turn to Europe and Belarus, where very honored to have with us the Deputy Minister of Finance from Belarus, who has been so since 2011, and is also the Deputy Chairman of the Interministerial Infrastructure Board in Belarus that is preparing a national infrastructure plan and responsible thereby also for the PPP work in Belarus. So please, Deputy Minister, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Mr. Executive Secretary, ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor for me to be here, and thank you, Mr. Bach, to invite me to be a part of this high-level panel. And of course, it's a pleasure for me to see so many people so interested in the development of PPP on this conference. As an overarching theme of the session is to establish a global partnership for infrastructure development that will assist member states to achieve the sustainable development goals. Let me start with some global figures first. Annual expenditure of governments on infrastructure will amount to $1.5 trillion, of which in Europe over $700 billion annually. The latest trend in Europe with infrastructure development is characterized by such peculiarities, such as financing of infrastructure by private sector on the condition of return of investments by the government through fixed budget payments. Second, infrastructure is very interesting for banks as a specific field to invest in for a long-term period and with a low risk, actually. There is a shift from free of charge use to availability payments approaches over infrastructure facilities. That is very important. And the last one, project financing, is a common tool to bridge the financing gap. Belarus is not an exemption and has a huge demand in modern infrastructure under the conditions when either budget revenue are slowing down or living standards requesting higher quality of services provision are growing. Our first attempts in developing a national infrastructure plan by collecting infrastructure needs from ministries and local authorities showed clear demand in the facilities of transport, energy, municipal, housing, and social infrastructure, and the gap between the available budget and the requested financing is very, very significant. Belarus is a country with public sector dominant over private. About 80% of GDP is produced by the public sector. Over the recent years, government's activities are aimed at creating a framework for private sector development. One of the new elements of economic policy of the state is this direction is the development of public-private partnership. PPPs are considered in Belarus not only as a tool to engage the private sector in social and economic development of the country, but also an opportunity for investors to either in long-term investments as equal partners with a pre-agreed and guaranteed rate of return. It's very important. It is also a way to transfer technologies from developed countries to emerging markets. And I have some advices for those who just start the process of PPP development in the country. Always put the public interest, the people first when devising a PPP program. We're consumers and should be the ultimate beneficiaries of PPPs. Ensure that political will exists and at the highest level. It's very important for the development all stages of PPP project, the strong political will. Address the legal framework and get the advice of all stakeholders, including the lenders and the private sector, to make sure that the legal framework is conducive to attracting investments. Build your institutional capacity by improving all the public sector lead and line ministries. Our institutions that were created at the first unit of PPP in the Republic and then the infrastructure board. Train your public sector to understand not only the advantages but also the pitfalls in case PPPs are not properly implemented and their possible negative effect on the citizens. Make the payments to a private partner as the highest priority of budget policy. It's very important for the private sector and for attracting money in the country. Struggle any attempt to corruption at all stages of the project cycle, and it's very important as well. I wish you success in your work in the coming days and the future. Let us enjoy a fruitful session on global partnership for infrastructure development in the spirit of cooperation and support. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Deputy Minister, for very clear advice. You need the highest political will, you need the legal framework, institutional capacity, training, payments should be high priority, corruption should be fought, but you should put people first. Thank you very much for a very strong message and for your experience and your adventurous attempt to jump from a very public-dominated economy directly into strong PPPs. Very useful. Thank you very much. We now turn to India, where we will have experiences from the director of the PPP unit in India, who's also with us here today and have already moved into a number of experiences. So please, Ms. Mahapatra, we are very pleased to have you. The floor is yours.
Excellencies, delegates of the Expo, ladies and gentlemen. We've heard from so many exponents today about how public-private partnerships move towards the goal of sustainable development, inclusive growth, and the fact that infrastructure development ultimately is the path that one has to follow for any country to be able to achieve its economic growth and development goals. I'll just briefly touch upon how India has taken this whole concept and this whole idea of the private sector partnering with the public sector to be able to meet its development goals. In fact, when we looked at the infrastructure development gap in the government of India when we were developing our 12th year plan, we saw that the gap needed an investment of close to $1 trillion US. And we recognized that, and you have to understand, in a country where, you know, the public sector and the government has always been the one providing the public services, for the government to acknowledge that 1/3 of this investment has to come from the private sector, and some of it in the form of PPPs, was a very, very big, I would say, an understanding that came about. In fact, our PPP story is not just 2-3 years old or 5 years old, but it's more than 2 decades old, and we've been taking a lot of initiatives that we feel that governments can learn from, because if you remember yesterday, Mr. Bach had talked about good governance, and good governance is what actually brings together confidence for the private sector to actually partner with the government by investing in projects that will ultimately meet development goals, that meet the requirement of public services, and ensuring that at the end of the day, the ultimate consumer, that is the public, is satisfied, meeting key performance indicators. How do we ensure that all these things come together? How do we ensure that there's interest in the private sector? Because we must remember, at the end of the day, the private sector is driven by the profit initiative. The private sector looks at the project which is commercially viable. He doesn't just want to partner the government because his aim was development and his aim was the provision. That is our job in the government. And that's where government sector initiatives, and what we've done is we've set in place institutional mechanisms which give that kind of, I would say, transparency, accountability, what I call good governance, and what brings, what I would say, confidence for the private sector to invest in projects that the government puts out and bids out for. Most importantly, how do you ensure that the correct kind of projects are bid out? How do you ensure that the project is going to be successful? How do you ensure that there is going to be project delivery? So what we did is we streamlined the process of approval. So we ensured that files don't go up and down between ministries. We put in a place where you have a proper committee that sits and decides based on the cost of the project, based on the certain parameters of the project. We have a proper due diligence procedure. We have proper forms laid out. You have to fill in this form. You have to ensure that you're looking at the equity IRR, you're looking at the project concession period, you're looking at, say, if it's a road project, that the traffic projections are right. So what we did is we streamlined the process and we streamlined the procedures for approval of projects. We put in place a due diligence process for appraisal of projects. We had a committee set up in the Ministry of Finance for that. So that was about due diligence for projects. Then we come to how do you ensure that in spite of all these processes that the private sector does bid for these projects. Ultimately, if you remember, the whole aim of PPP and the whole aim of infrastructure development, public services. How do we ensure that a public service in a particular project is done or is bid for? The private sector, like I said, looks out for viability, commercial viability of a project. So what we did is we set up the Viability Gap Fund. It's a scheme which provides financing of the capital cost. And what we do is we give up to 20% of the total project cost from the Government of India to the project developers at the time of construction. So that kind of increases the interest and the viability of a project. So we provide financial support, and we also leave it open to the project authorities, which could be the state government, which could be a line ministry, to give an additional 20% of the total project cost. And this is a grant. This is not a loan, but a grant that's given by the government. Another important thing for projects, PPP projects, ensure that projects are well structured, well developed. If this project is not structured well, at the end of the day, you'll find that even the project sector, the private sector person will find that he's not able to deliver the needs. How do we ensure that the project is well delivered? Government authorities, we are ill-equipped to come up and design a project well. So what we've done is, we know that there are a lot of expertise available out there, whether it is technical consultancy, whether it's private sector PPP experts, legal experts. How do you fund such kind of expensive services? So the Government of India has also put in place a project development fund through which we support state governments and line ministries, again, to basically develop their project development. So these are the kind of initiatives we've taken, and what we've done is actually been able to standardize all these processes, procedures. We've come up with standard contractual agreements. Again, it's very easy for a project authority to then develop a contract agreement. He doesn't have to start ab initio. So you have these standard documents that are available. You have standard bidding processes. Everything is out there, is available. It's used as a template, and that template can then be adapted, whether it's for a particular sector or a particular ministry. We have something called, in fact, all this information is available on our website, and we're happy to share and exchange information and share our best practices with countries. We've been doing that kind of process for a long time, even with countries in Africa. looked at knowledge exchange with even some countries like as far out as in Peru and Colombia. So we look forward to being part of this entire family of the UNEC, and we're setting up the Water and Sanitation Center of Excellence then, and we're there, and we'd like you all to learn from the institutional frameworks that we have developed from in the Government of India for PPP projects. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Director. Transparency and good governance, due diligence and stringent approval procedures in the committee. Co-financing models through the Viability Fund was a new element also put on the table, but the well-structured projects, templates, and a strong willingness to share. It's available, but also share through the forthcoming Center of Excellence, Water and Sanitation. Thank you very much, Director, for this very useful introduction. And thank you also to all our three first panelists here to stay within time. I promised that I would be a very somewhat polite, but also a little bit brutal moderator, because we have a distinguished panel and a lot of people here wishing to give their perspectives. Now we turn to the Philippines, and we are very pleased to have the ambassador of the Philippines here, who's been ambassador since 2011, but has a lot of experience with him, also as the former governor of the Central Bank of the Philippines and chairman of its monetary board. So, Ambassador Cuisia, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Executive Secretary. Your Excellencies, delegates, and ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon to all of you. Philippines Health Secretary Enrique Ona has asked me to extend his regrets for not being here today, and he's requested me to share with you his message about public-private partnerships in health in the Philippines. Improving access of the poor and marginalized segments of the population to adequate health services has been an important issue that has been discussed in the Philippines for some time. In 2010, when the Aquino administration took over from the previous administration, there was a huge and seemingly insurmountable gap between the rich and the poor in terms of access to health care, such that among the rich, only 10 infants out of 1,000 live births die, whereas among the poor, more than 90 infants die. 8 out of 10 of the richest pregnant Filipino women gave birth in health facilities, compared to just 1 in 10 of their poorest counterparts. These disparities have resulted in the unnecessary deaths of many Filipino women. Mindful of the plight of the poor, the overarching objective of our universal health care program has been to ensure that all Filipinos, especially those belonging to the 2 lowest income quintiles, have equitable access to quality health care. To realize this objective, we have focused on strengthening the implementation of the National Health Insurance Program to ensure the coverage of the population, especially the poor, and enhance the benefits of all its members. Then we conceptualized a nationwide program to modernize and upgrade rural health units, hospitals, and all other government health facilities, adding much needed capacity and raising quality. The program would strengthen the public hospital's capability to provide the best tertiary care possible and would enable the medical centers to fulfill their role as the end referral hospital in their respective regions. Where do public-private partnerships or PPPs in health figure in this picture? I can confidently say that PPPs are an integral part of Kalusugan Pangkalahatan or universal health care. PPP is a cooperative venture between the public and private sectors built on the expertise of each partner. The arrangement is clearly defined through an agreement that delineates the proper allocation and utilization of resources, risks, and rewards. The partnership may cover the provision of healthcare services to logistics management, from information and communication technology to capacity building of health and medical procedures. The modernization and upgrading projects may be undertaken through PPPs, as in the case of the modernization of the Philippine Orthopedic Center, or MPOC. The private sector is expected to introduce innovations including state-of-the-art technology, provide more efficient and cost-effective medical services, and also much-needed resources for modernization efforts. Department of Health is pursuing PPPs as a strategy to augment the capability of the government to finally address the health infrastructure gap while ensuring that this project would not pose additional financial burden among the poorest and the marginalized sector, thereby providing all Filipinos with equitable access to health care. International assistance has been made available to the Philippines for PPPs in health projects. In 2012, the Philippine Secretary of Health signed a Memorandum of Understanding with Steven Scalage, United Nations Economic Commissioner for Europe, or UNECE Executive Secretary, establishing the International Specialist Center of Excellence on PPP's health in the Philippines. The center has a major task to identify the best practices in health PPPs and is envisioned to become the focal center on PPPs in the health sector internationally. The center will also help to train government officials in the new skills required to do PPPs in the health sector, such as project management and private financing. There are other activities that the Specialist Center has also planned. We hope that this expo will foster a deeper sense of commitment and cooperation among all of us and help us transform forward-looking health programs for PPPs. I believe that we're all here in a desire to join forces in improving the health of all peoples, especially the poor, fully cognizant of our complementary roles. Thank you and good afternoon.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, describing your experiences with PPPs in a very sensitive sector, the health sector. And yesterday in my speech, I also told about Manila Water. Again, water and PPPs can be extremely sensitive because of access to the poor goes for health as well. But thank you for sharing this experience and for your strong ambition to share it even further with the PPP Specialist Center and Center of Excellence in the Philippines on health. Thank you very much. A very useful and encouraging statement. Those were our country experiences, 4 very different country experiences from 4 very different parts of the world. Now we will learn from our experts and our development partners on how they can contribute and what their experiences are with PPP in support of sustainable development. And our first speaker here will be the Senior Director of the PPP Group in the World Bank, and previously Mr. Carter, he ran the IFC's PPP Transaction Advisory Department for 6 years. So I do believe we here can talk about a true and very experienced expert, but also manager and advisor to countries around in the world on PPP experience. So Mr. Carter, we are very pleased to have you. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Executive Secretary. Last year, in 2013, in emerging markets, the total amount of financing for infrastructure projects where the private sector was providing financing was $150 billion throughout all emerging markets. Unfortunately, that figure was down by about 15 to 20% from the previous year. So we have an interesting and rather challenging situation where there's a lot of rhetoric about PPPs and a lot of activity and interest by many governments, and yet the actual closings, the actual concluded financings of PPPs has fallen in the last year. And indeed, it hasn't really risen very much in the last 3 or 4 years. So how can we change that situation? We've heard today from several countries which have been doing a good job in this, but how do we spread out this experience to more countries? I think that the guidance has been given already. I would fully endorse. You absolutely need political leadership. You need senior administrative capacity. You need to put resources into project preparation. You need to hire good advisors. You need to talk to the private sector during the course of designing the project and bidding out a project. And you need to put in place some capacity to supervise PPPs. And then you need to do what the lady from India mentioned and to standardize as much as possible. Of course, it's easier if you're in a larger country where there are many projects. So to me, although the big projects attract a lot of attention, I think if we're going to achieve the SDGs, the answer to that will be around standardizing contracts and processes as much as possible to get transaction costs down, to make sure that the private sector is not disappointed, is not waiting for a long while for governments to make decisions, and where there's less scope for a lot of negotiation after bidding has taken place, to keep the credibility and transparency of the process up. Just to give one tiny example of something that I'm quite excited about, the team that I used to run in IFC has just concluded 4 very small projects, water projects in Benin. What those projects are is to extend their projects where private operators are just extracting water from boreholes and distributing the water to a few hundred families in the area. We've put a PPP in place whereby they get longer-term arrangements going up to 7 to 8 years from simple annual arrangements, and a requirement to put some investment in, some extra investment in, to extend that out, those water systems out to reach several thousand people. Now, those projects in themselves won't change the world. But within country Benin, there are the opportunities for another 300 projects like that, and in West Africa, the opportunity for 5,000 more projects like that. If we can do that, if we can standardize, use those models and roll them out, that's how we're going to reach the SDGs. And that's our challenge, is really around standardization. And I think you'll hear more about that from one of the speakers in a moment. In that respect, I just want to mention one initiative that we're taking in the World Bank Group, working with the other multilateral development banks, and we're in discussions to do that with the UNECE, which is to put in place a certification scheme which will allow professionals working in the PPP area to study a body of knowledge, a set body of knowledge, to take some exams, to demonstrate a track record of experience, and then to be able to put in place a certification after their name. We want to try to get the level of expertise around the world broadened around PPPs, and using a body of knowledge that many people agree is important, legal, procurement, accounting, etc., etc. And we think this is the route to try to spread the PPP revolution. I'll talk about some of the other things a bit later, but I just wanted to stress this importance of standardization and certification. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senior Director, Mr. Carter, for that strong emphasis on the points made already, on everything from leadership, advisors, capacity, but especially on the standardization and the certification issue that I'm sure we will return to. And then encouraging news from West Africa. You can do even very small PPP projects. I think that also from Aruba, that could be an encouragement to learn from those experiences. Thank you very much, very useful. Now we turn to the European Union, where we are very pleased to have with us the Minister and Principal Advisor from the EU delegation in Washington, and the Director for International Affairs in the European Commission's Director General for Economic and Financial Affairs. So again, vast experience with us, and we're very pleased to have you. So, Mr. Likea, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Excellencies, delegates, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be here with you, and thank you for having been invited to share with you some of our views on infrastructure financing and PPPs in particular. In fact, the point that was made earlier that there are huge needs and the public funding available is not enough, is not peculiar for small countries. It does apply to large budgets like the European Union countries. Therefore, we need to look to other sources. and other sources there are. And we turn to investors and they tell us, yes, there is plenty of money, there is plenty of institutional investors ready to, searching for relatively appropriate deals and stable over a long time. So there is the capacity there. So the point is to match those that available capacity and the huge needs. And then when we turn to the various actors and ask, well, what is now preventing these flows from coming to infrastructure? As Mr. Carter said, the investment is declining in size. So what is the problem? And we hear very different stories. We hear from promoters that the problem is knowledge about the possible potentially interested investors. And also expertise about the contractual public-private arrangements. We turn to investors and they tell us, no, money is there, but what is lacking is knowledge about the pipeline of well-prepared and bankable or financeable projects. And paramount, we want to make sure that the political environment and the business environment of the countries concerned is adequate. Then we turn to public authorities and ask, well, what is the problem? The problem that they tell us is they lack the expertise, as we have seen, on the opportunities and challenges of engaging with the private sector. In this respect, I can tell you that we have in the EU some examples of cases where PPPs went wrong. PPPs are extremely useful instruments, but they must be handled with care because they involve usually contingent liabilities, and these contingent liabilities may emerge at the wrong moment. We have seen that during the crisis, that some governments were really caught in commitments that they had made to private promoters, guaranteeing a certain flow of revenue for those projects. So it's not easy. The complex provisions and complex contracts are a problem there. So then they also require often regulatory and legal regimes that are adequate for attracting investors. So all these calls for some way of marrying, of bridging the gap between investors and project promoters, and on the other side, the authorities. So in this respect, we welcome all the initiatives that are being created to create capacities and exchange knowledge so as to build on the expertise of those that have really worked. And these initiatives are at the UN, and the UNEC is a clear example, and it has been, and we have here some examples where it does work in Belarus or Philippines. But there are also the multilateral development banks, and Mr. Carter also was clear about the potential with the PPPs. Capacity or advisory capacity at the World Bank. There are others, other multilateral development banks, and particularly the European PPP Expertise Center run by the European Investment Bank is another one, but also other multilateral development banks in the Asian Development Bank, the Inter-American Development Bank also have this type of capacities where they try to marry and to exchange the expertise and knowledge and promote this standardization. So there are initiatives. On top of that, there is the initiative that has been running for some time, but that came to some fruition a few days ago, that in fact this weekend in Brisbane, the G20 initiative to the Global Infrastructure Initiative, promoting precisely this the setting of common principles and common guidelines for countries to really make themselves more familiar and more attractive for this type of arrangements, and the creation of this global infrastructure hub that will be set up in Australia that will precisely facilitate this exchange of information and the initiatives towards standardization and better knowledge. So to sum up, we do welcome all these initiatives. We keep on working on our direct financing and support to some initiatives to create capacity, as it was in Belarus or elsewhere. We keep on promoting the regional or global capacities to really exchange that information. And in some cases, our bilateral financial instruments also help in supporting, for instance, in some feasibility studies that make projects really bankable, really attractive, and that make them better structured so that they are more attractive and they reduce the risk to investors. So once again, we welcome those initiatives, and we will keep on working along those lines.
Thank you very much, Minister, for a very precisely laid out set of challenges. The money is there, the expertise is there, but it doesn't really turn into concrete bankable projects because of a number of deficits, perhaps on the legal environment, the expertise, the training, the project development, good ideas, feasibility studies as a way forward, and new challenges that you also addressed on the liability issues, especially in an economic crisis, I think is a very valid point. But globally, G20 are right behind us, so there should be a big potential to further explore and develop this work. And how we do it, and how do we contribute, and how can the UNECE do it? Here I am now pleased to end the panel with first, Jeffrey Hamilton, who's the chief of the Cooperation and Partnerships section in UNECE and have led this work for quite a while and has now engaged heavily in exactly some of the issues that we have addressed. So, Jeffrey, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Bach. Let me say this is a bit of a double team, myself and Peter Ward here. And there's a lot of converts in this room. There's certainly a lot of converts who've been at it for a long time here in public-private partnerships. What is wonderful is to see Belarus. 5 years ago, if you said Belarus going to stand on a panel in Washington promoting public-private, well, you would have got a lot of money on that. And so there's a lot of converts. But one thing we have to say, this isn't a guaranteed success. We're not leading a great cavalry charge to great success. It's not guaranteed. There's a lot of work ahead. Our goal in the Centre of Excellence is to deliver and develop the international PPP standards that will make the UN Development Goals and especially the Sustainable Development Goals achievable, to make them a deliverable proposition. Our vision is PPPs that put people first. That is listening to them, consulting with them, and ensuring that projects meet their needs, and especially the socially and economically vulnerable members of our society. I grew up in Scotland. I was a child and went to school, and it was often in November, not Novembers like Washington. These were freezing, cold, wet mornings going to school, and we were out in the playground, and at 9 o'clock the bell would ring. And I remember the teacher putting the young girls who were freezing beside the iron bars of the heaters to warm up and to become compos mentis for the classes to begin. That was because the schools, and schools in Britain were all the same, they were built in the Victorian era, were not fit for purpose. What has happened with the Private Finance Initiative, with the Schools for the Future program, is that schools have been rapidly modernized, completely transformed. The kids were listened to. They covered enclosures over them, and also they gave them internet. As a result of that, scaling up, these projects delivered a better educated group, an educated, skilled workforce, and transformed, I would argue, the British economy. So this is what public-private partnerships can do. What we have also now is the challenge of the SDGs. I'm not going to repeat it, but the gap between the delivery of the SDGs and what is available with governments is colossal. It's just not going to be closed by traditional route. So public-private partnership is not an option, it's an absolute necessity if these goals are to become realizable. International standards, what are they? Well, these are simply benchmarks of performance. If you meet the benchmark, if you deliver, you succeed. If you don't get to the standard, you fail. Why do we need them? Well, there are lots of national best practices. 5 years ago, it was all about what Britain was doing or what France was doing it. There are no international best practices, and that's what is lacking. Standards are critical to give to the innovators within a government who are going to take PPP forward. They don't want to take a leap in the dark. They want to have confidence. They want to have empirically based things that they can use to develop them. They want to go and try and convince opponents within their government that PPPs are useful. That's why standards are so important. They will scale up delivery. Countries who develop them, their own standards, as we've heard, accelerate their own programs. They will also improve the information flow, and they will also raise barriers to entry. I hope small and medium-sized enterprise too will provide advice and guidance, and that's what standards can do by allowing small and medium-sized enterprises to bid with the Big Four in providing advice. Why is South-South so important? Well, I did say a few days ago, Peter, a lot of nice British gentlemen going down to developing countries and helping, lots of governments helping with PPPs. It's much, much better if it comes from the south. It's much, much more convincing if you're a country in Africa, if a neighbouring country also provides that sort of advice, much, much more effective. Now, how are we going to go to do this? Two-stage project, two-stage process, development of international best practices through the specialist centres, and then the work of the project teams to develop them into standards. I call it 7-7-7. 7 stages to the delivery of the standards, and 7 months rather than 7 years. I think that 7-7-7 is going to be quite a useful forward momentum there. With 3 project teams, 1 on zero tolerance to corruption, 1 on certification, and the other on PPPs and health policy. I'm going to hand over the floor now to Peter Ward, who's the project team leader for the PPPs and health policy.
Thank you very much. No, I will do that because, but thank you very much, Jeffrey, for a strong call for standards and also for your childhood experience of now scaling up schools in Scotland. Jeffrey is a true Scotsman and a stubborn one, luckily, and therefore he really puts a lot of energy and direction into our work on PPPs. But those who will do the standards and those who will capture everything in this panel and bring it into something that can be used by even more countries are our experts. And therefore, we are extremely thankful to those experts who are stepping into our project teams and building standards. And the prime leader of those is exactly Peter Ward, who is the project leader for the project team on PPPs in health policy and also director of the healthcare projects at John Lang. So we are very pleased for the work you take, and tell us, can you do the 7 principles, 7 months and 7 stages and deliver? Peter, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Executive Secretary. So Jeffrey set me a challenge there that I'm more than ready for. So I've been, since June, I've been leading a team which is developing a PPP standard in the subject of healthcare policy. And I'm just going to describe in 5 or 10 minutes the reason the standard's needed, so the why the standard needs to be established, what we're doing and the process we're following to go about it, and then how we're aiming to get information which will objectively provide empirical data to support the development of standards that can be used by governments to establish their policy in relation to healthcare PPP. And then when, so how we're going about it and how we're going to comply with Jeffrey's 7-month rule. So first of all, why? Well, as the Executive Secretary has said, the need for investment to achieve the Millennium Development Goals and the Sustainable Development Goals, of which a third to a half are directly related to healthcare and the need for investment in healthcare, is very clear and very stark. And it's unlikely to be possible for government taxation to achieve those objectives. The demographic change means that over time expectations of all populations will increase. The evidence that life expectancy in the country in the world where life expectancy is longest has been growing since the mid-19th century at a rate of 2.5 years every decade, so 6 hours every day, is a fantastic thing that we should all be celebrating. But it's going to be even starker in evidence over the next decade or two in low and middle income countries. So the need for investment to respond to that demographic change and the rapid growth in technology is quite overwhelming. So in fact, disproportionately, there's going to be a need for a higher level of investment in the healthcare sector. And the cost of care as people do get older, and the technology that can bring with it, means that public-private partnerships are a very good tool in the armoury of any government to respond to it. But of course the projects or the transactions are complex, and they represent very long-term commitments, and a requirement at the beginning of those long-term commitments to transfer risks in an effective way. And I think whilst there have been good PPP projects and bad PPP projects, we're equally keen to learn from both to make sure that the standard reflects best practice, which has a strong evidence base, and therefore allows a clearly defined scope for our project to develop the standard, which will give governments access to a broad database of information about what works and what does not, what the funding communities want and what the practitioners need, as well as what government needs as input to their projects. So secondly, the what we're going about. There's a UNECE standard development process comprising 7 stages, as Jeffrey's touched on, and we're in the third of those stages now, having gone through the governmental process to approve the development of a standard. We've now formed a team of 30 to 40 people from across the world who are contributing their expertise to make the standard as effective and as factually based as possible. And there'll be 2 outcomes from the standard development process. The first will be the output of an analysis which has resulted in a very large database of empirical evidence from projects as to what has worked and what doesn't, and from governments and private practitioners as to their own experience in the development of PPP units, into the standardization of PPP guidance and the establishment of PPP policy. And then the second thing will be the standard itself, which we're aiming to keep to quite a concise piece of guidance that will help inform governments in the best practice as to how to go about establishing the PPP program, and then how operationally to deliver it. So if I could give an example of that, a number of countries around the world have now developed and even got quite well into the procurement phase of their PPP programs, but a lot of our experience of the delivery of PPP programs comes from the time when the buildings themselves are complete, but it's time to commission them and get the clinicians to practice in those hospitals or clinics, and for the patients to start using them. And frequently there can be very different feedback from that phase, just as there can be different feedback 10 years into the operational concession when there's a need for healthcare practices to change. So how we're going about it. We've divided the activity that we're delivering into 6 work streams. And briefly, those comprise policy and legislation, so the guidance of and the establishment of PPP laws to ensure that their PPP policy is integrated with healthcare policy and fiscal policy. Economic context and affordability, so making sure that the program that's implemented is consistent with the real need, and particularly relating that need between urban and rural populations, and providing a level of equity of access to healthcare that will help meet the Sustainable Development Goals. Planning objectives and business cases, so very clearly setting out the case for individual projects. And training and resources, which is very important feedback from the private sector, making sure that the resources are necessary to fulfill them. And then finally, engaging with the market and ensuring that the procurement process and the management process is transparent. The process we're following is to complete the analysis phase by January, during which we're going to circulate a standard series of questions to all governments with an active PPP program or plans to develop one in the healthcare sector, and also the private sector. And together, published information and the results of those two questionnaires will form the basis on which we draft a standard. And finally, our work in the project team will be integrated with the activity of the Secretariat, who are overseeing it, and with the Center of Excellence in the Philippines, which will manage the process by which we get governmental feedback, and will ultimately be audited by the Business Advisory Bureau, who will act as a critical friend. So I'd like to urge you all to participate in responding to the questionnaire, and thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Peter, for that very focused introduction to how you are going about developing a standard and why a standard is extremely needed, especially in the healthcare area where you have long-term complex transactions with complex risk and growing expectations. I think that is basically how you summarized the challenge in the healthcare system. And also for promising, that's what I heard at least, that you could do the 777, 7 stages, 717 principles, whatever. And we really look forward to seeing the result of this. And I think the entire panel, and I'm sure all of you will both wish to engage and also look for the results of this work. Now, there are time, because we've had a disciplined panels, they've all done 6 minutes, I think, on average, but very focused interventions. Thank you very much to the panel. So we do have time for both the panel to react on each other's introductions and interventions, but also to ask for questions from you. So I would ask immediately now whether we have any questions or comments from the floor. Any of you who sit back with a burning issue or a brief experience that you would like to share with us, then the time is now. You just raise your hand. If not, I will also ask our panelists here if they have issues that they would like to address with each other. We have a question now. The first daring participant, please come up to the microphone and ask your questions. And the rest of you, please come also. We will take 2 or 3 questions if there are questions or comments, and then we will ask the panel to respond. Please.
Thank you.
And introduce yourself. Yes.
I'm Xia from China, and I did my second master in Sciences Po Paris, and I took a course in PPP, which was given by 2 staff from EIB, European Investment Bank, and so I think this is a very cherishable moment for me, a young practitioner, to hear all the experts here. And I want to ask you a question. So does a country issue a PPP law very key for the country to facilitate future PPP projects? And if those countries didn't have a sector for hosting the PPP section, which minister should it be based in, which are better for facilitating the future PPP projects? Thank you.
Sorry, the last part of your question, the first was on the law, the legal framework, and the second was on?
Second is if a country, some of the countries, I think they don't have a sector to host the PPP groups.
Yeah.
So if they want to host this sector, which ministry should it be based in? Thank you.
Those are good questions. Advice on the legal framework and advice on the practical institutional arrangement. How do you anchor the best PPP center in a country? Should sector-wise or perhaps more centralized? Good question. Perhaps we can also just ask the panel if I can add a very broad question, but also discussing on the standards and the need to develop standards. Perhaps you can end here also summarize a little bit what are the most important critical areas to be dealt with by a standard, so that Peter Ward, his team, can have some advice to bring with them. Because some of it may be best covered by national legislation and experiences, and some of it may be critical to have across-the-board standardization when it comes to developing public-private partnerships. So now we have 3 questions, so perhaps we should turn to the panel again, and I will end with our own experience, but perhaps this time then go the reverse order and therefore ask the European Union, Mr. Lisea, I don't know whether I pronounce your name right, I probably don't do it correctly. Lisea, yeah. So Mr. Lisea, sorry for that. Perhaps if you would like to address the questions and you are also perhaps summing up conclusions.
In fact, I don't have the information on all the questions, but let me just point to one that you made on where should the capacity be located. This depends on the actual institutional structure of the country. And if we look at the units or the centers that have been developed in the members of the a group that has been set up by the European Investment Bank, about 2/3 of the countries had set up a central unit, and most of them, I think, in the Ministry of Finance. But as I said, it depends on how decentralized the power for the fiscal powers and the finances powers are within the countries. Some federal countries have several units in the various states of the federation. Others that are more centralized have just one at the center. So it depends on the actual structure, institutional structure of the country concerned.
Thank you very much, Mr. Carter. The World Bank, some replies and also concluding remarks. This will be the last round of the panel. So, Mr. Carter, please.
Thank you very much. On institutional arrangements, I would endorse locating a unit somewhere in the center, Ministry of Finance or Ministry of Planning. I think that's the way to keep neutrality between different sector ministers. Now, in terms of standardization, I think for project types that are small and similar, one can do some standardization around documents. But more generally, I would encourage standardization around processes rather than documents per se. And so, for example, I think it's good practice for a government to make a preliminary estimate of the fiscal impact of PPPs, of the economic impact. Actually, several of the things that were said by the lady from India about the way that they've handled it, I think that I really like the way that they've approached it. And I think so all of that helps bring predictability to investors and indeed to government officials, which increases certainty and makes a successful program more likely. I think another area where there is scope for strengthening, perhaps some standardization, is in contract management, which is, there's always a lot of excitement in the preparatory phase, but if we don't pay attention with contract management, there is the risk of things going wrong, which can then affect the political appetite for a wider program. So, but overall, I think there's, as I mentioned before, a lot of scope for putting out more information about PPPs, information about returns, information about performance, and this in itself will help accelerate interest. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good replies and good advice. Ambassador Kusia? Yeah, we will take it from the reverse order. Everybody will get the floor also for final remarks if possible.
Well, we've had very limited experience in terms of PPPs in health. One of the, I guess, lessons we have learned is that the cooperation of government and non-government organizations in the activities of the special center is vital in stimulating shared learning between different agencies involved in PPPs in health programs. And we'd like to share that with our audience. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, Director Mahapatra, a lot of good responses to your advice. And can you give us more? And can you reply?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, before I just wanted to speak about the questions. What India also was talking about when we're talking about knowledge sharing is that we would like to also help people learn from the mistakes that we made. Because obviously it's not that it's been hunky-dory from day one, and there are a lot of lessons that we've learned. So it's like we're also here to tell you what not to do. So it's not just the fact that it's been smooth sailing. Coming to the location of the PPP centers or the PPP cells, well, in the central government, for example, where I am, the Government of India's PPP policy is determined in the Ministry of Finance. But we've also tried to, in order to mainstream PPPs in the state governments as well as in the line ministries, we've been trying to promote setting up of PPP cells and PPP units, and in fact, it's become mandatory that if you take any kind of technical assistance or help from Government of India, say in terms of PPP expertise, that you must set up a PPP cell and there must be a nodal officer who is identified for PPP. And in fact, for countries which are getting into this whole program, you must take the help of multilaterals like maybe the World Bank and the Asian Development Bank to kind of support your initial program of having PPP expertise stationed in your PPP cells. This helps you to kind of formalize your program, identify projects. And of course, we've already talked about standardized procedures, don't want to get there anymore. But basically, like you said, it brings a kind of predictability, and the private sector exactly knows what it's buying into when it's bidding for a project. And model documents just, you help putting out ideas about what is the eligibility criteria when you're selecting project, proponents, when you project developers, or even transaction advisors. So it always helps if you don't have to, reinvent the wheel and write things afresh.
Also, perhaps the question: to how far extent have you brought this into legislation? Your best practices, standards. How much can be done by legislation? How much has to be done by best practices, good advice, training, expertise?
Well, as you know, in terms of the Government of India, interestingly, in spite of having a 2-decade-old program, we don't actually have a PPP policy. We're still working and drafting it, and it's kind of evolving because the whole program has matured over so many years. But the enabling environment that I was talking about, the institutional mechanism, that right now is the guiding force that basically is what I would call the governance structure that's in place, that's ensuring that the right kind of projects are in place and the procedures are being followed. We have regulators for certain sectors, and the best thing, of course, about the judiciary is that it's independent, and you'll find that, it doesn't look nice for a government officer to say that, but 80% of the judgments go against the government, so we do have a very independent judiciary that kind of brings even more confidence for the private sector.
Thank you very much. Now, Deputy Minister Yamalovic, I know you have a law on the way. It's in Parliament as we speak. You are crossing your fingers that it will soon be passed. Can you perhaps also, in answering the question, describe what are the key elements in the law that you find absolutely necessary in order to achieve stronger PPPs, and then your advice to the standardization process again?
Of course, when we discuss the law, the draft law, the most important is the guarantee for private investor to return money investing in PPP projects. And of course, it is the second part, it's the capacity building within the country, the responsibility of different governmental bodies who's responsible for cooperation with private partner, who's responsible for structuring of PPP project. As for location of PPP unit, I think that it fully depends on the structure of government in the country, and of course, for example, for Belarus, we have the Ministry of Economy, which is responsible for development of infrastructure, for development of private sector, and of course, this unit, the Center of Excellence in PPPs, was founded as a structure of Ministry of Economy. It means that the main goal of this PPP unit is to cooperate, is to provide an advice to private partner. Is the most important part of our work, because we have capacity in line ministries, we have strong capacity in the Ministry of Finance, and as for cooperation with private partner, of course it was decided that PPP unit should be in the Ministry of Economy.
Thank you very much. Another experience, slightly different, but a ministry in economy can also in some countries be a very forceful ministry. I know that from Denmark. So at least also a centralized approach instead of a sector ministry. Now finally, excellent team, the Minister of Infrastructure, I do understand that you are responsible for the PPPs, but are you under strict control from the Ministry of Finance in Aruba? What were the main, you talked already about your legal framework and how it was necessary to create it in order to sign long-term contracts in the PPP sector. But perhaps you can also say a little bit more about the other elements in your legal framework that was so necessary for you to bring about. Thank you.
Thank you. Actually, we are under control of our Prime Minister. Oh. So the PPP unit is under our Prime Minister, because you have different sectors. You have PPPs in health, PPPs in education, infrastructure. So the Prime Minister have an overall view. So PPP in Aruba is under the Prime Minister. So he controls us every day, every minute to realize this project. Changing the law was very important for us in Aruba, because it gave the private sector, as said, the confidence that their law guarantee the feasibility of the project and the payment of the payback for private sector, because we can talk about PPP, but private sector is doing business, so they want to see the return on investment for a long term, and they want a guarantee that government change that, but the project is continue, and the long-term agreement contract will be respected by other government. So in the law we change that and we guarantee that, and also in the law we guarantee the transparency of the procurement and the bidding. So in the law, when we do a PPP project, the bidders can at several moments go to the judge and challenge the decision of the government if it was a good decision, if they not agree with it. So the law was very important. And another important thing in the law what we changed is the dialogue. So the dialogue with the bidders was not part of our daily bidding system in Aruba. So we have to put it in the law that we can have the dialogue with the bidders and at the end choose the most, the best bidder for the project. Standard is very important, and we are very glad that the UN EC is doing the standard, because when we start with the project for a small island, we didn't have the standard. So we went to our partners in the Netherlands and we adopt the European standard to our own island standard. So we have right now in Aruba a lot of experience about standard for small economy, how you do that. And that's what we want to share with other islands, and we would like to involve the Caribbean, because we have attended a lot of conferences in the Caribbean, and a lot of islands wants to do projects, PPP, but they are too small for the international bidders, and they don't have the experience for that. So we want to share that experience. One thing we learned in Aruba for PPP projects, and it says today, is you have to do it for the people. The quality of life has to be improved by this project. So we in Aruba have developed a way of communication in Aruba, what we call the social dialogue. In the social dialogue, government is sitting there, private sector is sitting there, and the community is sitting there. And we discussed the project, how we're going to implement this project. Is this project important for the island? What is the improvement of the economic, for this project on the economic perspective for the island? What is the quality of life means if this project is going for this project? So we discussed that, and in that social dialogue, we discussed also how are you going to pay back? Because you have to pay back the investment that private sector is going to do. So we discussed which law, which tax are we going to implement to pay it back. But for finalize, Aruba is getting a lot of experience in small scale economy projects, PPP, and we would like to work together with all the panelists and thanks them for having us today here to improve the PPP projects in the Caribbean, mostly for small-scale islands. So we were looking forward to work together with everybody and see what is the best way to improve PPP projects in the Caribbean for the quality of life of the whole region, not only Aruba, but for the whole region, because that's why we're doing it. At last, it has to be improve the quality of life for our people. So thank you for that.
Thank you very much, Minister. I think this was a very good note to end on. Also, the social dialogue, the private dialogue with private companies, and the core goal of improving the lives of citizens. The aim of this session was to hear experiences, share experiences, build knowledge in order to scale up the use of PPPs for sustainable development. I think it was very much achieved thanks to a very strong panel who stood forward with exactly that, and all panelists, and especially also our country representatives here, all said we find this to be so exciting and so important, that we wish to share our experiences, and centers of excellence are being established on the various issues. I think our panelists deserve a big round of applause, but you will wait a second, because just after the round of applause for our panelists, I will ask the country representatives from Belarus, from Aruba, and from the Philippines to come up here, and we will sign documents that will express exactly this wish to share knowledge across countries, across borders, to the benefit of all citizens. So we'll have a short signing ceremony just after. You have now given our panelists a big round of applause. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well done. Very good. Thank you. Well done.
Thank you, sir. Well done.
Very briefly, yes, right now. Yes, I'm sorry, yeah.
Well, thank you. Nice meeting you.
Nice meeting you, Minister.
So let's
see you again.
We will first have the sign. Yes. So, these are the... Yes, so this is for Aruba.
This is for
And who will sign it?
Philippines.
The minister will sign. This is,
Oh, this one extra.
you already signed it?
Yeah, I can.
Okay,
we
sit
tend
down.
to sign.
Yeah, sit
okay.
down here and sign. And for wait a minute. We just need to set up. So, the head of PPP unit. So sit down. Sit down. Sit down. Sit down. Okay. And now, so you're allowed to sign.
To sign anything we do it?
For a roof.
Just pretend to sign.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Sorry, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Richard, thanks a lot. Okay. So, but we should exchange it. Yeah. This one was for you.
Thank you.
Good. So, I think there's a plate for you.
Okay, right. Thank you.
Steve over here.
Okay, perfect. So how does this work? Hi, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon. Okay. The UN Office for South-South Cooperation would like to present a plaque to each panelist in recognition of their special contribution to South-South Cooperation. Presenting each plaque will be Mr. Yiping Zhu, Envoy of the UN Secretary General and Director of the UN Office for South-South Cooperation. As your name is called, I ask each panelist to join Mr. Zhu on the floor in front of the dais to receive their plaque. And perhaps we can hold our applause until everybody's got their plaque. Okay, the first one will go to Mr. Christian Frisbach. Okay. Couldn't wait there, Mr. Christian. Okay, and the second will go to Oslin Benito Sevinger. Okay. Right. Okay. Mr. Maskim Yermalovich. Jose Kuzia. Jose? He just left. Okay, next, Lawrence Carter. Mr. Lawrence Carter. Okay, thank you. Okay, Mr. Antonio de la Cia. Okay, thank you. Ms. Abhilasha Mapatra.
Celso will take the ambassador's plaque, the gentleman on the left. So then you could read out at the end the ambassador
of
the Philippines, ambassador, this one here, at the end.
Okay, Mr. Geoffrey Hamilton. Okay, Mr. Peter Ward. Excellency. And His Excellency, the Ambassador of the Philippines. Okay. Okay. Thank you very much. And with that, I think we've completed the awards. Thank you very much for your participation.